Religious horror. The church had been abandoned for decades, yet it remained standing, a solemn ruin against the shifting gray sky. St. Apollonia's Cathedral had once been a place of worship, its towering stained glass windows casting holy light onto rows of devoted followers. Now, the glass lay shattered, its fragments buried beneath layers of dust and dead leaves. The great wooden doors, weathered and warped by time, groaned on their rusted hinges whenever the wind pushed through the empty halls. The cross at the peak of the bell tower hung at an unnatural angle, barely clinging to the structure it had once blessed. For years, rumors surrounded the cathedral. Some said that the clergy had vanished without explanation, leaving behind only the scent of burnt incense and a congregation of empty pews. Others spoke of a hidden chamber beneath the altar, a place where the priests had performed forbidden rites. Whatever the truth had been, the church had long since become a place to be avoided, a landmark of decay standing at the edge of the village. One evening, a man arrived at the outskirts of the forgotten church. He had no name worth remembering, no past that tied him to the land. His interest in St. Apollonia's was purely academic, or so he told himself. He had spent years studying ancient religious texts, piecing together the scattered references to secret rituals lost to time. Every lead had brought him here, to the place where prayers had turned to whispers of something far older than the church itself. With careful steps, he entered through the arched doorway. The air inside was thick, damp with the scent of mildew and something less identifiable. Moonlight streamed through the broken windows, casting elongated shadows across the floor. The pews remained, their wooden frames split and splintered. At the far end of the hall, the altar still stood, its white cloth stained with something too dark to be dust. He approached, his fingers brushing against the symbols carved into the stone surface. They were not of Christian origin. The markings spiraled outward, their patterns too intricate to have been the work of any casual hand. Beneath the altar, the floor bore a heavy metal plate, covered in the same unknown script, a trapdoor. With some effort, he pried it open. The air that rose from the depths was cold, carrying with it the scent of earth and something long sealed away. A stone staircase descended into darkness, its steps worn smooth by centuries of passage. He hesitated only for a moment before stepping down, his breath slow and measured. The walls bore inscriptions, illuminated faintly by his flickering lantern. Some bore familiar imagery, crosses intertwined with serpents, eyes set within halos of flame. But others were less comforting. Figures with elongated limbs, their hands raised in supplication toward something unseen. At the bottom of the staircase, the chamber widened. Stone pillars rose toward an unseen ceiling, each wrapped in chains of rusted iron. In the center of the room, an altar stood, carved from a single slab of black stone. Upon it rested an open book, its pages untouched by time. The text was inked in deep crimson, the letters forming shapes that defied his understanding. The deeper he stared, the more they seemed to move. A shift in the air pulled his attention away. He turned, his lantern casting shadows that no longer matched his own movements. The chamber had been silent, yet now he could hear it, low, rhythmic, the sound of a breath that was not his own. It came from the altar, from the book itself. The pages fluttered, though there was no wind. The church had been abandoned for a reason. The lantern flickered as he stepped back, the shadows stretching unnaturally along the walls. The air had thickened, pressing against his skin with an almost physical weight. The book on the altar remained open, the ink shifting, reforming, shaping itself into symbols he could almost comprehend, but not quite. He closed his eyes, exhaling slowly, willing himself to turn away. Something did not want him to leave. The sound of chains rattled against stone. He turned sharply, the pillars surrounding the chamber groaning under an unseen force. The rusted iron bindings, unmoving for centuries, began to tremble. A whisper filled the space, not from any single direction, but from all around him, its words shapeless yet pressing into his mind like the memory of a dream. He had read about places like this, sacred sites that had been repurposed, altered to serve something else. It was common in history. Old gods were buried beneath the new, their altars broken and reshaped. But destruction did not mean erasure. Sometimes, when the right words were spoken, or when the wrong presence arrived, the old would remember itself. He turned back to the book. His fingers trembled as he reached for its pages, but before he could close it, a force moved through him. His breath hitched, his vision blurred. The chamber around him twisted, its walls elongating, the symbols along their surface glowing with a sickly light. The chains upon the pillars snapped one by one, their echoes reverberating through the stone. Something stepped forward from the dark. It had no shape, no form his eyes could hold on to, but he could feel it watching. Its presence filled the chamber, pressing against his lungs, slowing his heart. The whispering grew louder, the voice layered, neither a single entity nor many. It was simply there. The symbols along the altar burned brighter. His body moved without his consent, his knees buckling, hands pressed against the stone. The book's pages turned of their own accord, stopping on a passage he could not read but understood completely. A choice. The presence did not force him. It did not demand. It simply offered. The church had been abandoned, but not forgotten. Whatever had been sealed here had remained patient, waiting not for release but for recognition. The faith that had bound it had long since eroded, but belief was something else entirely. The man had sought knowledge, and now it was being given. The book's ink pooled, rising from the page in thin, twisting tendrils. He could feel them against his skin, their touch neither warm nor cold, neither painful nor pleasant. They settled into his flesh, seeping through his pores, carrying with them the weight of what had been lost. When the presence finally withdrew, the chamber returned to stillness. The chains lay broken. The book was gone. The altar, once blackened stone, was now something else, something smooth, polished, waiting. The man stood, his breath steady. He had come seeking truth. He had found it, and he had become part of it.